In this video, we are talking about every running back that you should either be starting or sitting in week 12 of fantasy football, breaking down every single game. But before we get into it, if you can please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you do end up enjoying. Starting with Minnesota at Chicago, Aaron Jones, obviously a must start, but I will say he's been a little bit underwhelming as of late. 4-game touchdown drought, 1 game this year over 100 rushing yards. I know Aaron Jones isn't usually this running back that racks up a ton of yards on the ground, but he just hasn't been doing much. You're really hoping for a touchdown here. I know he's dealing with a couple different injuries. He's an older back, but he just really hasn't looked great. He had that 3-4 game stretch earlier on in the year where he really impressed, and ever since then, it's kind of been downhill from there. There's no other running back you're really considering. Like, if you are really desperate, you can throw Cam Akers in there and hope that he sees a larger workload. But outside of that, like for Minnesota, Aaron Jones, and that is it. And then for Chicago, D'Andre Swift, you're starting him, but he did see his lowest snap count since week 1 last week, probably because he suffered a groin injury would be my guess, as he's been limited in practice the last couple of days because of that groin injury. I don't think with new offensive coordinator Thomas Brown, all of a sudden it's going to be a 50-50 timeshare between Swift and Johnson. I think it was more just the fact that D'Andre got hurt, so they were managing his reps or limiting him the second half of the game. We don't really know, but that's my guess. Roschon Johnson, you can throw him in your flex and you're just praying for a touchdown, hoping he gets a goal line opportunity, and maybe he's a solid play if Swift is limited in this game. And obviously, if D'Andre is out, then Roschon Johnson is a must start running back this week, especially with 6 teams on bye. Lions at Colts, Jahmyr Gibbs, David Montgomery, obviously smash starts as the Colts are allowing the 10th most fantasy points to the running back position this year. And even if it wasn't a good matchup, Gibbs and Montgomery have been sensational this season. You're starting them regardless. Montgomery already has 10 rushing touchdowns on the year. He has been a touchdown scoring machine on a really good potent Lions offense. And then Gibbs, super efficient, explosive. He can score from anywhere on the football field. So we like both of those guys. Jonathan Taylor hasn't been as positive. He's coming off a 25-touch game that resulted in 60 yards. Not great. And now gets another tough matchup against a stingy Detroit run defense. And he could potentially get phased out if the Lions get up big early, which is what they've been doing for weeks now. They're scoring 45, 50 points in some games. It's been crazy. So Taylor, you're just hoping he gets in the end zone. He's going to see nice volume, but how efficient will he be? We don't really know. You're starting JT, but you're not as excited as you probably were earlier on in the year. Rhamondre Stevenson, another back that's been seeing a lot of volume, but just hasn't been doing much with his opportunities. And if he doesn't score a touchdown, then you're not happy. You're unimpressed. You're disappointed, as he's averaging 2.8 yards per carry over his last 6 games. Miami has struggled against the run as of late, so maybe Stevenson comes through, has one of those bigger games, but you're hoping for a touchdown from Rhamondre. Some work in the passing game would be nice as well. Devon Achane, clear-cut RB1 for the Dolphins at this point, and New England is giving up the 10th most fantasy points to the position, and Achane has 20-plus fantasy points in 3 out of his last 4 games. He's been really good. He's getting all the work. Raheem Mostert is a shell of himself at this point. He looks old. He doesn't look good anymore, so that's why Jalen Wright is starting to eat into Mostert's workload, so I'd be stashing Wright because of that. And I would be benching Raheem if you can help it. You probably can't start Wright either, but he needs to be on your bench. Bucks at Giants, Tyrone Tracy Jr. has been a revelation this year. He's been very impressive. He's kind of come out of nowhere. He's a really talented back that has a safe floor and nice upside at this point. And you could see even more checkdowns now with Tommy DeVito as the QB1, who figures to run less than Daniel Jones did. And the Bucks are allowing the 5th most fantasy points per game to running backs. So I really like Tracy not only this week, but for the remainder of the year. He's one of these guys who could be a league winner for your fantasy team down the stretch. And then speaking of league winners, I talked about in a previous video, Bucky Irving. I think he is going to dominate down the stretch here for Tampa Bay. I think both backs should shred this Giants defense. and they each finished as top 7 fantasy running backs in week 10. Rachaad White is getting it done through the air, and Bucky Irving is shifty, explosive, and has just really impressed on the ground. He can also get it done through the air as well. So you're starting all these guys. Cowboys at Commanders. Brian Robinson Jr. looked pretty good in his first game back from that hamstring injury, even in a tough matchup in week 10 against the stingy Eagles run defense. He had 14 fantasy points. Pretty efficient day. He got into the end zone, and his teammate Austin Ekeler has really started to come on with more opportunities. Austin has been a really nice player all year long. He's looked like that old vintage Ekeler that we know, and he's really thriving in the passing game. He's a guy that can rack up 8-10 receptions if Daniels continues to feed him. I think Eckler's really benefiting because Jaden is clearly not right yet with that rib injury. He's running less and he's checking it down more. So Ekeler has thrived in the passing game. I'm starting both of these guys, B-Rob and Austin. I really like them both in a favorable matchup. And then for the Cowboys, Rico Dowdle is finally the man in this backfield. It took Dallas way too many weeks to make Rico the featured guy, and now it's just too little too late because this Cowboys offense is just not very good with Cooper Rush under center, with Dak Prescott done for the year. So it's really unfortunate. I would have liked to see Rico in a monster role from week 1. Why are we giving Zeke Elliott touches at this point? But you're starting Rico because he's the starting running back on an offense. And with 6 teams on bye, you're going to take all the starting running backs that you can get. And it's a favorable matchup as the Commanders are allowing the most rushing yards this season. So I like Rico. I like the 2 Commanders backs. I think this is a pretty high scoring game potentially if Cooper Rush can get it done through the air. Chiefs at Panthers. This is interesting with Kansas City because we know it's a really good matchup against a horrible Panthers run defense. Isaiah Pacheco has been logging some limited practices. Is he going to come back? Kareem Hunt has had these dud games because he's just hasn't been efficient. He's not breaking tackles. He's not explosive. Like, Kareem goes off when he gets the checkdowns from Mahomes. He gets the 1-yard goal line carries. That's how he's thriving. He's thriving on volume. I'm worried about Hunt. If he's carried your fantasy team, he's not going to see much work, I don't think, once Pacheco gets going. Maybe the next couple of weeks he will while Isaiah gets acclimated again. But for the fantasy playoffs, Hunt could be giving you zeros. I know they say they're going to use both backs, but once Isaiah gets going, I just don't see a reason to have Kareem on the field. Maybe in pass down situations, but that's about it. But for this week, you're starting Kareem Hunt. And if you're really desperate, if Pacheco goes, I'm fine putting him in your flex just because 6 teams on bye. He's probably not going to see a ton of work in his first game back from that brutal injury. But if you have no one else, you can plug Isaiah in and just hope that he somehow falls into the end zone because he's going to be in a limited role. The Chiefs are a smart organization. They're not going to push him back when they don't really need him against the Panthers. So should be interesting to see how that shakes out. And then another interesting backfield on the other side of the ball. Chuba Hubbard, we know, has been a fantasy superstar this year. He's been amazing, double-digit fantasy points in all but 1 game this year. But what's not so amazing is this matchup. The Kansas City Chiefs are incredible against the run as they've allowed the fewest fantasy points per game to the running back position this season. I wouldn't be playing Jonathan Brooks if he is active, which sounds like he's going to be. He should be on your bench, but I probably would not throw him in your lineup. This is not the week to do so. Titans at Texans. Joe Mixon, man, where did this come from? Like, he looks like a completely different back. He didn't even look like this with Cincinnati. He has been incredible for an older back. He's the RB1 in fantasy points per game right now. All this dude does is score touchdowns. He looks really good doing it. He's a top 5, top 3. He might even be a top 2 back the rest of the season in fantasy. If you drafted him, kudos to you. He is a league winner. And then for the Titans, not very exciting. Tajay Spears probably going to be out with that concussion. And Tony Pollard did not look good last week. He's been solid this year, so you're playing him. But the Texans are a pretty stingy defense all around, so you're not excited about it. But you have to plug Pollard in with this week with everything that we're dealing with injuries, buys. Broncos at Raiders. Javonte Williams apparently is the back of last week. Will he be the guy this week for Sean Payton? We don't really know. I really like Javonte though. I know some of his advanced metrics aren't impressive. I still do think he's a good back, but it's kind of scary because it could be the Audric Estime show this week. It's a good matchup regardless, so I'm probably starting both guys if you can. I prefer Javonte over Audric because we don't really know what his workload is going to look like, but Vegas is horrible against the run, so plug those guys in if you need them. And then for the Raiders, this running back situation is probably must avoid for me if you can help it, as Alexander Mattison and White both dealing with injuries. So is it going to be the Ameer Abdullah show? Maybe. I'm not really excited about it. Like, Abdullah could have 5 catches. He could get into the end zone. I just don't really want to start him. I don't want to deal with it. Broncos are a pretty good defense. So if you need a desperation running back and White and Madison are out, sure, plug in Abdullah in your flex and just pray that it goes well, because we don't really know how that is going to shake out. 49ers at Packers. Christian McCaffrey, he's finally back. He hasn't really had that vintage big blow up CMC game yet. He's given you double-digit fantasy points in each game since he's been back, but he hasn't gone crazy. Regardless, he's an auto-start player in a potentially high-scoring game against the Packers. Josh Jacobs has really been cooking over the last month, ranking 7th in yards after contact per attempt. Kind of looked a little rocky to start the year, but he's really rounding into form. And you can run on San Francisco. They're probably not going to have Nick Bosa. That's going to help the passing game and the running game. I would expect another big performance from Jacobs this week, and it's going to be interesting to see if Brock Purdy plays. It might be a bigger Jacobs game if Packers are just easily beating the 49ers without Purdy and they're just running out the clock. We shall see. Cardinals at Seahawks. I really like James Conner this week. Coming off that bye, he's well rested. Conner hasn't been incredible this year, but he's been very consistent. He's been getting it done, and it's a nice matchup as Seattle has allowed 138 rushing yards per game, which is the 6th most in the NFL. And Trey Benson, the rookie running back for Arizona, starting to come on, starting to get a little bit more work. I think Arizona knows they want to keep Conner healthy for the stretch run, for potentially the playoffs. And so they're going to give their rookie running back a role. And he's been playing well when he's been given the opportunities. In week 10 carries, 62 yards, along with 2 receptions for 25 yards. That's what Benson did 2 weeks ago. So that's nice to see. Plug him into your flex if you really need a running back. And then for Seattle, Kenneth Walker, he's been kind of quiet as of late, but he's still seeing the usage. He's still being featured on the ground, through the air. He's one of those guys that could have that big blow-up game at any moment. So you're obviously starting him and just hoping he goes crazy in a favorable matchup. And Zach Charbonnet, if you need to flex him, I'm okay with it if you just have no one else. But he's probably not going to give you much because Seattle still wants to give Walker the majority of the touches. And he's going to have one of those games where he just goes crazy, and it could be this week. So keep Walker in your lineup. Keep the faith. He hasn't been horrible. He just hasn't been as good as he was earlier on in the year. Eagles at Rams. Don't need to go over this backfield on either team much because Saquon Barkley has been fantastic. He should have been the first overall pick in fantasy drafts. Who would have thought? Really talented back on a really good offense behind a top 3 offensive line. I don't know why we didn't see this coming, but here we are. Saquon has been incredible, and so has Kyren. Williams has been a little limited the last 3 games. He hasn't scored a touchdown over the last 3 weeks because it's been the Puka Nacua Cooper Kupp show, and that's hurting Kyren. They're scoring touchdowns with Stafford through the air. They're not relying on Williams as much, so that's hurting his overall fantasy production, but he's still seeing the majority of the carries on this really good Rams offense. So you're starting Saquon, you're starting Kyren. These are locked in top 5 backs the rest of the way. And you're not starting any other running back on either team in this game. I'm excited for this one. Eagles, Rams. It's going to be really entertaining. 2 really exceptional offenses going at it. Must-see television. Lastly, on Monday Night Football, Ravens at Chargers. It's the Harbaugh Bowl, where the 2 brothers, Jim and John, go at it on Monday night. 2 really good teams that are scorching hot right now. I know the Ravens are coming off that loss against Pittsburgh, but they have still been playing really good football this year, and that is partially because Derrick Henry has just been Derrick Henry. Every single year people doubt him, age, and he just continues to play at a very high level. He somehow already has 15 touchdowns on the year, but he hasn't had that big fantasy day since week 9. But at any moment, the big dog can take a carry 70 yards to the house. So you're locking in Henry into your RB1 spot, even in a difficult matchup against the Chargers, who have given up the second fewest fantasy points per game to running backs. Doesn't matter. Derrick Henry can go crazy at any point. Justice Hill, don't mind him in your flex if you need that pass catching back. Hill is a guy that can always score a touchdown. He racks up a couple receptions a game, so you could do a lot worse at this point. And then for the Chargers, J.K. Dobbins, he was the man who sealed the game against the Bengals last week with that rushing touchdown. He hasn't been amazing. He's been pretty inefficient, Dobbins that is, but he's still a talented player on a good offense. I will say it's a brutal matchup against the Ravens, as they're one of the best units in the NFL at stopping the run, so we don't love that. So you're probably not starting Gus Edwards. I guess you can throw him in your flex if you need to. Remember, it's a revenge game for Dobbins and Edwards, as they both were Ravens at one point. I think it could be a surprisingly high-scoring, fun game where there's a lot of fantasy points to be racked up, so I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be a movie on Monday night. That's all I have for you guys today. Thank you so much for watching. If you took away anything from the video, if you can please like the video, subscribe to the channel, I would really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next one.